Hello, everyone. My name is Vidisha, and welcome to today's screening of Seasons of Life. I will start today with an introduction about Zuban. Zuban is a feminist NGO that is an active participant, chronicler, and publisher of the women's movement since 1984. It works to increase the body of knowledge on women with a special focus on South Asia and India. Among Zuban's projects is Cultures of Peace, Festival of the Northeast, which is run in collaboration with Heinrich Böll Stiftung India. The Cultures of Peace project aims to create spaces for conversations on issues relevant to the Northeastern states through the avenue of the arts and cultures, that is, photography, writing, literature, filmmaking, activism, and more. This screening is part of the 2020 program for the Cultures project. Today's screening is a special one. It is Dr. Dolly Kikon's directorial debut, the first short film of, we hope, many to come. Dolly Kikon is a feminist and an anthropologist who teaches at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Her work focuses on the political economy of extractive resources, migration, development initiatives, gender relations, food cultures, and human rights. Most recently, she is the author of two books, Leaving the Land, Indigenous Migration and Effective Labor in India, and Living with Oil and Coal, Resource Politics and Militarization in Northeast India. Her film, Seasons of Life, is set in the Wokha district of Nagaland and focuses on women's work of foraging and on the tradition of fermenting bambooshoot. Fermented bambooshoot is a delicacy and an integral part of the food culture among communities in Northeast India, and the food item links the region to its South Asia and East Asian neighbors. Seasons of Life follows Sumungi, Pithunglo, and Yanchano as they labor to forage and ferment tender bamboo shoot, a food item cherished across households among Himalayan communities in South Asia. The screening of the film today will be followed by a conversation with Uma Chakravarti and Yirmiyan Arthur. Uma Chakravarti, as we all know, is an Indian historian and filmmaker. Beginning in the 1980s, Chakravarti wrote extensively on Indian history, indulging with issues relating to gender, caste, and class. Among her publications are Shadow Lives, Writings on Widowhood, and Rewriting History, The Life and Times of Pandita Ramabai. Yirmiyan Arthur describes herself as a mother of a pensive daughter and a very curious son, whom she hopes will grow up in a gender-equal world. She is currently working to fulfill her dream of opening a children's library in Kohima. She is also the photo editor with the Associated Press. To say a word about Dolly, here is Urvashi.
Hi, everyone. Let me add my welcome to Bidisha's. We are really delighted to be hosting this short film of Dolly's. In Zuban, there isn't one person who does not ferociously love Dolly. So when she approached us to ask if we would partner with her on releasing, launching, premiering, call it whatever you like, this short film, we were all delighted and honored. And we're really pleased to be doing that. Bidisha has mentioned that Zuban is an NGO. It's also a feminist publishing house. I want to say it's the feminist publishing house, but because I'm a well brought up girl, I won't make that claim. But I just want to say that that's what I'd like to say. But we're a kind of hybrid organization that works part NGO, part publishing house. And the NGO part of Zuban carries out a number of projects, of which this project under which we are showing this film, Cultures of Peace, is one that focuses on the northeastern region of India. And that is carried out in collaboration with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And the idea behind Cultures really is to talk about looking at culture and cultural production and conversations around and through those as a way of talking across borders and as a way of building peace with different kinds of breaks. So this is the 10th year of Cultures. It's very special to us. And this year's program, which has been conceptualized by my colleague Meghna Singh, takes as one of its central subjects, the subject of food, which is why Dolly's film is also so important to us. This film shot all 11 minutes and 47 seconds of it is really not only about food. In that very short time, it's a film about livelihoods. It's a film about work. It's a film about gender. It's a film about domestic relationships within the household. It's a film about men. It's a film that locates the politics of food inside the framework of a state which has been fought for long in conflict. And as there is a ceasefire, what happens to food habits? It's a film about poverty. And it is also very interesting, a film about migration and how those who migrate to the so-called mainland carry with them food as memory of home and location and a link, but it's the very thing that also, in a sense, estranges them to a hostile, unaccepting kind of population. And then, of course, how that changes as food makes its way into the internationalization of local cuisines that is happening. So there are many things going on in this film. It is rather, for those of you who know Dolly and her work, and I imagine many of us do, watching this short, nuanced and layered film is a little bit like reading a Dolly Kikon paper or listening to a Dolly Kikon talk. So here's the film. Let me not stand between it and you, except only to say that we are really grateful to Dolly and her team for agreeing to have this film shown on the Zuban platform. And we're also extremely grateful to the two speakers, Uma Chakravarti and Yirmiyan Arthur, who have joined us today. And I'll hand you back to Vidisha now.
Before we move on to Dolly, I would just like to reiterate some of the ground rules for the webinar. Someone's not able to hear anything. I think it has to do with like you have to connect the audio, but I'll just go over this, and this has already been sent to you in the mail that you'll be auto-muted on entry with video disabled. The raise hand function will be available for you to direct requests at the host, so everyone with Zuban in their name. Entry will be moderated to guard against trolling. Please use the name you did when you registered on our form, which will make it easier for you to admit from the Zoom meeting room. Audience questions will be taken from 5 p.m. onwards via the chat box, but you can feel free to type in before then. Please be advised that all messages, including those sent privately in the chat box, are visible to the admins in the end of the meeting transcript. No hate speech, targeting, or discriminating against any community will be tolerated. Any participants using such speech will be removed from the webinar without warning. The speakers today have partially given their consent to being quoted outside of this webinar meeting. You can quote Dolly and Yirmiyan, but please write to us for clearance before posting Uma's comments. The discussion will also be recorded and posted online via our Zuban's social media accounts. The list of participants will not be made available. So we have a small surprise, which I think Dolly is going to introduce now. So over to you, Dolly.
Thank you so much. I would really like to take this time to thank Zuban, especially to Urvashi, Vidisha, and I think Meghna and Uma, Yirmiyan, and everyone coming on board. I'm zooming in from Melbourne in Australia, and I would also like to take this time to actually acknowledge the indigenous people of this land where I work, and where, in a sense, I did a lot of research for the film and also for my current book on fermenting cultures. I acknowledge, sitting here in Melbourne as I zoom in, that I work and I stay currently on occupied land, on indigenous land, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and future. I would like to take this time to welcome you all and thank you so much. Without much delay, I have a surprise for 189 audience members who are here to celebrate this movie with us. I have my very dear brother Akhu from Imphal Talkies, who will be opening the session for the screening and discussion with a song. So I would like to really take this time to welcome Akhu to the wonderful forum that we have this evening. So Akhu, the time is yours, and thank you so much for this surprise. And I hope the audience is equally surprised and excited that we have a song from Akhu.
Hello, everyone.
Akhu, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'll start with a song called Maria. It's a song based on a true story. Maria happened to be the, I mean, obviously it's a name which I have changed. It's a story about a girl who lost her parents in one of the ethnic classes that we had here. So Manipur have witnessed like, several ethnic class over the decades, and this girl happened to be one of the victims of that class. And how she grew up in an orphanage, and then when she reached a certain age, she was out in the streets, and then she was too vulnerable, and then she became a prostitute, and at that young age, how she became a prostitute, she couldn't take it herself, and then she started doing drugs. And then she became a drug addict, and then when you became the addict, then you needed money to buy drugs. So again, she went back to the same business, prostitution, and she was in this vicious circle, and then later she died of AIDS at such very young age. So this story I heard long time ago from local elders. So this is a true story, but not mine. Maria, she called me at night. She said I look alright. She said I look handsome. I know she got her injection. Maria, she grew up somewhere in Jurchan, somewhere in an orphanage. Later she got addicted to heroin. Maria, she was a prostitute. She was my substitute. When my love was not around, when my love was out of town. Sometimes we both get high. We listen to MIA, with the fuck to CIA. Maria, she died last summer. Maria, she was my heroine. Maria, I met her somewhere in Tamengang. Maria, I met her somewhere in Tamengang. She promised me she would take me to Shillong, where she met other people who sang gospel in Sunday church. She cried to me, "Our daddy, they killed in 1994 in the Nagaputi riot." Maria, she was prostitute. She was my substitute. When my love was not around, when my love was out of town. Sometimes we both get high. We listen to MIA, with the news from the CIA. Maria, she died last summer. Maria, she was my lover. When the police came to pick her up, she said, "Come closer, my love. Come closer, my child. Come closer, my love. Come closer, my child. If you wanna get high, if you wanna be someone Thank you. Should I play one more song or? Hello? Is anyone?
Hello. Yeah, Akhu, you have 4 more minutes. So
Yeah. Okay, I'll play one more song. Is it normal that there's no video of anyone? No photo. I mean, I can't see anyone. Is it normal? You switch off the video mode.
sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you.
No. What I'm saying is, I mean, the video is off for everyone, right? It's just a vocal. Okay. Yeah. So I'll play a song called "Mr. President is Coming." Again, it's a true incident, based on a true incident. Sometime in 2014, I got beaten up by the Manipur police. Manipur is a dry state. We don't get liquors here officially, but unofficially, like it's the wettest dry state. And I think it was summer of 2014. Indian President Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was supposed to come the next day. Then Imphal is quite like I think one of the militarized zone. So you get to see police already there, but especially when a VIP turns up, then the militarization goes up to another level. So I happened to be at this place called Mahabali, trying to get some booze. And these are small pockets, in Imphal. You get all these places. You get all this booze, and I was there, and then the police turned up, and then they started hitting us. I mean, I was not even drunk. I mean, we haven't even started. So I got so mad, and then this song happened much later, after a couple of months. So and all my friends who have never been to Manipur, if you drink, and if you think Manipur is a dry state, and you won't get anything there, that's impossible. This song has been like a tour guide for the tourists. So if you listen to this song carefully and note down the names of the places, then you know how to enjoy it. Every time you come to Imphal and Manipur. Shall we go to Kakulong? Shall we go to Kaisam? Shall we go to Mahabali? Shall we go to Music? Shall we go to Sekmai? Shall we go to Fayang? Shall we go to Kakulong? Shall we go to Kaisam? Shall we go to Mahabali? Shall we go to Music? Shall we go to Sekmai? Shall we go to Fayang? They say, don't go out, Mr. President is coming. They say, don't go out, Mr. President is coming. The nights we know are dark, the days we survive are bloody. How can you ask me not to drink? The nights we know are dark, the days we survive are bloody. How can you ask me not to drink? Shall we go to Ragailong? Shall we go to Ramsey? Shall we go to Sangapong? Shall we go to Ragailong? Shall we go to Ramsey? Shall we go to Naiko? Shall we go to Wando? Shall we go to Sangapong? Shall we go to Sanaipuro? They say, don't go out, Mr. President is coming. The nights we know are dark, the days we survive are bloody. How can you face is survival, buddy. How can you ask me not to drink? Hello, Mr. President. Hello, Chief of the Army. Every time you come, you bring curfew. Hello, policeman in the street. This is my song for you. Sing with me. Thank you, everyone. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much.
Iyo chấm chấm một tin là, vô hàng cha kia ye nhẹ cho, yên quyên thế, chỗ đó cái chỗ chơi đó, chỉ chỗ này na hàng hàng ở trong chỗ này, vô cha kia ye nhẹ chỗ đó.
저분은 럼태다 토다고 고지 문화 이체가 쓰도
Right. Okay.
Okay. So we'll start the discussion with your comments first, Uma. Then we'll follow it up with Yirmiyan's comments, and lastly we'll have Dolly's remarks.
Okay.
If you want, if any participants want to answer, like put their questions in, you can do it in the chat box, and the speakers will have the chat box open so they can also read the questions as it goes by. We will not be able to read out all the comments, but thank you for all your lovely comments. I'm sure Dolly is smiling from ear to ear. And we'll start it now, and we'll take the audience questions from 5.
Yeah. So I'm not really going to do something heavy and erudite because that's not me. But I watched it. I watched the film now. This was the 3rd time I watched it. So I've seen it at least 3 times, and that's good. Well, first to put it in context, and I know from Dolly, her work on food and the fact that she's been actually collecting, focusing on food as a way of actually understanding culture, people, and so on. So what's interesting about this film, I think, is it's a combination between the ethnographer who's actually collecting. It's an ethnographic film. It's goes into let's say an element of our lives, and then through it unravels a whole series of relationships. And these relationships are actually not only between the protagonists, the people in this film, and the food, but it's also to do with also their relationship to the culture in which they live. So it's a special genre of films which actually is documenting closely everyday aspects of life, partly to understand, partly to use in teaching, and definitely to archive, because the archiving aspect of, I think, filmmaking to me is very important, and perhaps it was to Dolly also. So those are, I think, the general elements that I would say I would highlight as far as the let's say the context of making this film. To me, is all of these things. Now, what is actually very striking is it's that there is a generational aspect to life, which is very strongly highlighted in the film, and you can get it in the first frames, because there are at least 2 or 3 generations of people there. There's a little child, for instance, in one of the early shots, even before the film actually begins. So you get the sense of the generation of life, and then the relationship of the food to that life through the generation of life. it's like nature provides you with some things, and then that itself becomes the sustenance for creating a cycle of living. And the economy of the bamboo shoot, which may have begun to start with as simply an aspect of your own food and reproducing yourselves, which is how historically human beings related to the nature and the what the good life, good earth provided, as it were. It's then that generational aspect, I think, of that of life is caught very well through just the bamboo shoot. Now, through bamboo. Now, I think the other thing that I found interesting is that it also allows the unfolding of the relationship between the forest and the settlement, because the early shots are really, you go into the bamboo forests and you cut the bamboo shoots, and you then bring it back and so on. And so in a sense, foraging, which I think historically in history has been a very important element of early historical existence, in which you reproduced life through, on the one hand, hunting, and the other from gathering. So gathering is an extremely important aspect of the supply of food. And it reminds one also of the work of anthropologists who would talk about the sexual division of labor, which ultimately comes into existence, in which men do some things and women do some other things, is actually caught here in an interesting way, because in terms of bare life, it's a society which is fairly well closely tied to a foraging. So not that cultivation doesn't happen, but foraging seems to be extremely important aspect of one's, let's say, the reproduction of the self through the food that you take in. Now, I was struck by the fact that we would be told, in one of the things that feminists had to do was to say that, look, the sexual division of labor, in which there's power that men have and women don't have, through the fact that the hunt was privileged over the gathering, is now being turned around, because now feminist anthropologists have shown us that the quantum of food supply is actually much larger in the context of what you forage. What you gather is much more than actually what the hunt represented. So the hunt might be the big animal which you went off to and dealt with through great ritualization and the beating of drums or doing whatever you did. And foraging or gathering was always regarded as a kind of lowly thing. But feminist anthropologists have told us that the food supply actually depended on the gathering and on the small trapping of small animals and so on. So actually women's relationship to production of food is extremely, is actually quite noticeable, and we should not buy into this, the ritualization of the hunt and the downgrading of the gathering. So to that extent, I think, and it's a very, or the entire gathering, I don't know if it's consciously done, whether men also go to the bamboo shoot forest, but here in this film, it's the women who are going to the forest and collecting the, bringing back the bamboo shoots. And there's a moment in which they describe the dangers of doing that. That it's a arduous, it's a dangerous task, and there are things like snakes and so on. So you get actually a sense of the both the bountiful aspects of nature and also the possible, possible very possible dangers to even the act of completing the foraging. So that I thought that was quite interesting. Now, See, so then there is this rough division of labor. And one of the things that I was struck by, I don't know if any of you have seen Agnes Varda's film called The Forager, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's called The Forager. She's actually, she's a very famous filmmaker and a particularly good editor. She edited her own films. She does the same kind of thing for modern society in Germany, located in Germany. She actually looks at the manner in which gleaning from the leftover of the grain and so on, and other things, that foraging is actually still a very large part of our food supply. And then she ends up with, describing and showing you how it ultimately reaches the market and whatever. Here also there is a reference to, you start with the collecting in the forest, and then you come back, and then there is a processing that you have to do. And through all of this, there is a continuous engagement with how tenuous the reproduction of bare life itself is. It's like without that foraging, even the household's own food supply, as well as its relationship to the market, would be strained, because this ultimately, what you bring back and you process and you dry and whatever it is, and then ends up in the market, because then there is a chain. There are people who would be having it over there. So I think that's another thing that the film manages to capture. Also, I was struck by the use of a refrain. The music is actually repetitive. It's a single strand. It seems to be weaving through the entire film. And I wondered if that was done consciously in order to actually to highlight the repetitive quality of life itself. It's like there is something so everyday and so routinized about it. And yet it is actually something that highlights that everydayness in terms of its sustaining human beings. I also noticed that I noticed, then there's very effective use of text plates. It only comes in the end, but the text plates actually contextualize the storyline, contextualize the film in terms of what it's tried to say to us. There's a moving moment, because there's a discussion about the fact that the husband is unemployed. And then that's the sequence in which the father is holding a baby and then kissing it and doing the things that the nurturant mother might be doing. And so there's this householder who's not able to support his family, but there is a way in which he too is integrated into the storyline in a moving way, because it doesn't actually trivialize this man's unemployment or his lack of formal occupation, but actually integrates him into that whole process of reproducing life. So in that sense, I thought that was a very interesting moment in the film. And in the last bits, you see a series of clips. Now, this is something that as a filmmaker, I'm also I have a tendency to want to do, not that I've done it in all my films, but you actually preserve a lot of your interesting camera work and your footage. By the way, the camera work is very, very, very interesting, because it captures the forest and its relationship very well. But you generate a lot of footage, and then you don't know how to use it because it doesn't come in the story. When you edit it, it is the editing follows a certain other procedure, and it has to carry another storyline. And all these beautiful shots what do you do with? So here in this film, these shots are actually the ones on which the credits roll. So you have the credits rolling on the one hand, and you have this actual cooking and the production and the beautiful vessels in which it's cooked and so on. So you have a series of these clips that come on the left-hand side, which is also part of the ethnography as far as I'm concerned, because it actually tells you how this ultimately pans out. And of course, this has already been mentioned by Urvashi, the meaning of food in cultures as you leave and you go away and you end up in different places. Chennai is the one that is referred to in the film, but it's also Australia. It is what Dolly's sitting and doing. I mean, she's out there in that boon lands, and I'll call it the boon lands. And her relationship with home and particularly homeland, her real homeland, through the forest and the settlements that are the backdrop for the story of bamboo being produced, is in a sense actually then brings in the and these women will never go anywhere. Huh? So they are there. They are reproducing the cycle of life there. Their children might go to some place, and then the ethnographer herself might land up in Australia. But they're all tied together in this chain in which there is the relationship of women to food production, to nature, to foraging, to just sustaining bare life, and doing that all in most every day, but in most moving ways. And so I really see that as the strength of this little film. In 12 minutes, it manages to do all of that.
Thank you, Uma. That was a lot of information and a lot of things. And Dolly is, I think, messaging also about she's delighted and she has more ideas. I'd just like to remind everyone who's participating that before you quote Uma out of this meeting, please write to us for clearance. We'll move on to Yirmiyan for her comments now. Yirmiyan, can you switch on your video and your audio? Yeah.
It's on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So Uma has actually broken it down so well into bits. I have nothing much to say after all of her review, but Dolly, 11, 12 minutes used so well. Like you have told, like my respect for the modest Basinga bambooshoot has grown like levels, because I'm a Naga. I love my bambooshoot. I cannot live without it, to be really honest. Bambooshoot and Akhu has been made very popular by its Netflix release on earlier last week. So without these two food, like I lived in Delhi for like, I lived in North India for like most of my life. Now I'm back in Nagaland and I've been here for a few months now. But like these two are food that really, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I could not live without having bambooshoot or akhuni in my house, or Raja Mircha. So Dolly, what you've really shown like the journey of these women, and as women, as providers, as fighters, you know, as your film has encapsulated everything really well. I'm really thankful. Thank you so much, Dolly, for that. And some things that to add to what Uma has said, for me, I notice very much the presence of children. You know, like they're noticing silently everything that's been happening. You know, every section that you're breaking down, I see children gazing, children looking, children interacting silently, and you know, but you might feel that it's really silent, but really children are really tucking in everything into their hearts. I like to work with children, so like for me, that's the first thing I noticed, right? I'm wondering with livelihood changes. And I wonder how much of this, because when you look at Akuni, the documentary that you've made, the film that you've made, it's a lot for livelihood, right? It's of course, like one of them said, it's our salt, it's our oil, it is all of that. But what forces these women to go into the dangerous jungle? Because we do know, like it's not something that you cultivate, you harvest, you have a field, you go there. Like tomorrow I'm going to the field to have a picnic with my kids to plant paddy, but harvesting bambooshoot is really not that. It seems so much more dangerous. And so I'd like to really hear more, Dolly, later on when you have the time, about how the ceasefire has affected, you know, our food culture. Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the ceasefire, so I'd like to know how before 97 and after 97, what was it? Maybe how has it helped these women, or what were their lives before that? Were they able to forage for food in the jungle? Was it dangerous? How much more so? That's one thing I'd really like to hear about. the third protagonist, unfortunately, we had to talk about this yesterday, Dolly and I. Though I only know the name of the second woman because she spoke her name in the film. Her name is Pitunglo. But the first and the third, it left me really wanting to know their names, because in such a short time, I really felt like I know their stories already, because you have done that so effectively. The third woman, I loved her. The third one, I loved her, especially because I felt like how the olden, like my favorite line in the film is weaving the mobile phone bag and the lotha mekhla. You know, I'm like, wow, you know, like she's doing both of them. Like I love this woman, okay? So and how she, you know, I learned this term in one workshop about work home chemistry. It's not about balance, because so long as you're balancing, you feel there's a certain nervousness in your body when you're trying to balance. But when there's a chemistry, like it just flows, right? And when she said that, for me it was an example of that, you know, like, yeah, I'm now weaving a mobile phone bag and I'm weaving a lotha mekla. You know how the old and the new are coming so well together for this woman, you know, and she's so strong. I love how she's painting her nails, how she's taking care of herself. I'd like to know difficult this for her as a single woman, because you did in the film that two of her siblings are married, so she is a provider. But in spite of the fact that she's doing so much, because as we all know in Naga society, it is really difficult sometimes for women, right? So I would really like to know how, what beyond the foraging of the bamboo shoot, you know, it's a life tough. How does are her family members respectful of her for the fact that she is such a strong provider, you know? In a way, married women, unmarried, the single women, they give their lives, like a lot of my unmarried aunts, or my unmarried sister for that matter, their lives are really for others, you know, they're just giving and giving and doing for others, right? Is that appreciated? You know, how is she being accepted or seen as in society? If you could speak on that, that would be lovely. About the music, I also noticed that, but I thought, for me, I was like, oh, that was so effective because it was 12 minutes, you know. I like to use a lot of music in my films. I've used Akhu's music before. And Akhu, you were so great earlier. Thank you so much. And Akhu, no, Nagaland would give you big competition for being the wettest dry state. Manipur, like Nagaland and Manipur are like, we don't know, right? So we have to speak about this. But I thought Dolly's using that one strain over and over, like it didn't distract. It was very soothing in the background to have this music, you know, filling in. For me, it was so good. Like I really, really enjoyed how you used this. I'm speaking so much. I thought I was not going to speak so much, but again, about for Nagas, how important these forests are for us, right? I mean, I speak now as an insider, right? Because most of our food, like for example, in the lockdown, I'm in Kohima right now. In the lockdown, the Chakasang villages did something that was so, so nice. The village would gather everyone, they would have an announcement on a day and say, on this day, we're all going to the forest. We're going to forage in the forest. We're going to take that, put them in the trucks, go to Kohima, because Kohima is a town. We don't grow our own, there is no space really for most people in Kohima town to grow their own food. So during the lockdown, because for us, boiled vegetables is like a staple, rice and boiled vegetables and chutney, right? And chili, like without that, we can't eat our food. So not having these vegetables was like, what happened, right? Because we are so used to like, you know, an aunt gives you, a neighbor gives you, somebody brings it for you, you know, that a villager comes, they come with a bag full of vegetables, you see, they're always sharing their vegetables. We're so used to that. And suddenly there was no supply. So these Chakang villagers, what they did, like they went out for a day, they would come back, the next day they came with trucks and they were just distributing vegetables for free. It happened right below my house, like my house is just above the main road. So that's what, and there was a huge truck. And when you look at those leaves, you probably think they're fodder for cattle, but they're not. They are these yummy, nutritious food that all of us enjoyed. So all of us got, you know, a few bundles, eat like, no, take more, you need more, right? They're just giving it. So for us, the jungles, the forests have meant so much. Like for example, during years of conflict, as I'm sure Dolly is going to touch upon, right? When our villages were burned, people were surviving in the jungles with what was provided by the forest, what was provided by the jungles. So our connection with our environment is so strong that I hope films like these would make us realize more, you know, about how we need to be conserving and keeping all of this intact, because we are nothing without forests, you know. At least for us Nagas, we are so deeply interlinked with our forests and our land that we are nothing without it. So, I mean, like in looking at the bamboo shoot, we think that, you know, because we have a lot of bamboo growing everywhere, even in Kohima, we'd probably think, oh yeah, that's where my bamboo shoot comes from, right? But apparently not. Like, a lot of people have to work really hard to get the bamboo shoot that we see in the markets, that we buy and that we relish every day, and that we take with us to Delhi or to Chennai or Bern. My sister lives in Paris. I mean, when her husband goes away on assignments for a few days, she opens the doors and windows and then she cooks a bamboo shoot, and then she hopes the smell will go away from the sofas, because, you know, akhuni, even though it's so strong smelling, it doesn't stay, it's not lingering. But bamboo shoot is different, right? As every Naga will say, the smell will be on your clothes, on your hand, you've washed them with hot water, with everything, but it's still there, right? But we cannot live without it, you see. Even even at the risk of wrath by our husbands who probably don't eat bamboo shoot, right? So a film like this, Dolly, thank you so much. I think I'm speaking too much because we probably don't have much time, but I think it's, and I was just telling her that she probably will, I mean, I won't be surprised if she becomes a filmmaker after this. But thank you, Dolly. There's so much to ask you, but it's a beautiful film. Thank you.
Thank you, Yirmiyan. We also hope that Dolly will become a filmmaker after this. And we are really praying for it now. Dolly, would you like to respond to the comments by Uma and Yirmiyan before we move on to the questions?
So I'm just taking down notes, and I want to thank you all for your time and the generosity. I agree. I mean, there's nothing to disagree. I agree with everything that you all have said. And Uma ma'am rightly pointed out the ethnographer in terms of looking at documentary, you know, as archiving, as telling a story. The generational aspect of life, food and seasons, yeah, the cycle is very important, and that's something that I wanted to capture it through food. The relation with forests, which both Yirmiyan and Uma ma'am brings out, is very essential. And I'll try to take the questions or the comments together, because I think the second part of the second part is very important, which Yirmiyan asked me about the pre-ceasefire days and the post-ceasefire days. And I consciously, the second half of the document, seasons of life, foraging and, you know, fermenting bambooshoot during a ceasefire, was something intentional that I did as an anthropologist. And I'll just briefly tell you all why. What is the politics and what's my thought behind that? I think Uma ma'am's take on foraging versus hunting is completely indisputable in terms of understanding it. And this also speaks, as an anthropologist looking at food, is the misconception that when it comes to cuisine like Naga food, people think that it's pork and rice. Surely I show pork and bambooshoot, so I'm also there kind of like to be blamed. It wasn't stereotyping in a sense, but when it comes to the hunting part of it, hunting is something very seasonal. So often, if you look at condiments, like the fermented items, those are the things that's making food tasty. And it's not particular to Naga food as such. If you look at food around the world, what is it that people eat? What makes food tasty is very essential, in a sense, to understanding this. I think the gender relations that both, I think, Uma and Yirmiyan alludes to is very important, whether it's in terms of cooking, in terms of caring, or in terms of just the lives of the women. And Uma ma'am's take on the men and the baby, I think that was very intentional. When I was editing, I was like, I have to keep this, because time and again, I am very clear when I take my position, I said, and I'm a feminist anthropologist. And I think coming from indigenous cultures, the idea of feminism, I can understand, might be sometimes be a point of debate. But increasingly, when we talk about, I think, feminism, when we talk about gender relations, I've always said that we can't talk about the place of Naga women without talking about the place of Naga men, because it is such a it is such a relational, I think, life and world that we inhabit. The pandemic is such a good time. You can see both men and women across the Naga areas, whether you know, you talk about Nagaland or Manipur, and not only about Naga people, but across communities in the Northeast, cooking together, working together, right? And actually, it is that lens that, in a sense, that I hope that we will adopt even for future relations, looking at that. The idea of, I think, before and after ceasefire and what it changed was really looking at various relations, and one has to do with the history of militarization that we have to understand, the kind of the history of curfew that we come from. I think I wrote an essay a few years ago, and I think it's called, it's around music. It's around music, and it's around picnic, right? It's about terrifying picnics. And this was after my trip I made to the hills of Manipur in Ukrul, thinking about what does it mean to have fun, right, in conflict zone. And in a sense, this has been a journey that I've had for quite some time, thinking about food. And now that I'm working on my book on fermenting cultures, as I thought more about it, how is it, right, that my trajectory in a sense is very strange, because my first book was on mining, that it was on migration, and now my third book is coming out in October. It's on Dimapur. It's called Ceasefire This, so please look forward to it. So the fourth book that I'm writing now is actually on food, and the more I thought about it, I felt really emotional, because my relation with food goes a long way back to my human rights days when I was in school, and then I started working as a human rights lawyer. I'm very young, in my early 20s, mid 20s. One of my very visible memory about working as a human rights lawyer was the fact-finding trips that we would do across Northeast India. And something that remained with me was actually food, right? And you might ask me how. One of the work that I wrote for WISCOM was actually experiences of Naga women in armed conflict situation. And if you pick that small monograph, you will see how women's, and I was interviewing women in the 80s, their idea and their memories of the conflict was actually burned granaries, burned crops, starvation. And that's something the late Kaka Iralu, right, Naga writer, also in a way documents in terms of the starvation, the lack of food. So when we think about human rights, my own lack of observation, I was really looking at human rights violations, and yet in that narrative also came in the story of food. And it's not only limited to the region we come from, across the world. If you look at it, counterinsurgency tactics, of course, use starvation and destroying crops as such. So that remained very, very central. So I would say that my coming back to food, in a sense, really tracing my own journey in human rights and politics from the ceasefire, pre-ceasefire all the way to 2020 would actually mean that, you know, it's been a long journey, and I think it's a journey of introspection. So I would like to thank Yirmiyan for bringing that, I think, to my attention, and also giving me the chance actually to talk about conflict and food, and in a sense, I think making that connection. I think Yirmiyan's question about who are the women becomes very important. The first woman's name is Tsamangi, and she's married. Then it's Pitanglo, and then Yanchano. And so I'm grateful that you pointed that out. I'm writing about their lives in the book that I'm writing right now, but I will make sure that, in a sense, I go back to the documentary and I put names. So that was kind of an oversight when kind of like I was editing the documentary. Their relation is very special, and let me just like say, perhaps use a few sentences to describe this. Both Tsamangi and Pitanglo, the first and the second protagonists, are married, they have kids. I was really drawn and very, in a sense, disturbed when I heard about Yanchano's story, because she's the unmarried one and she's the third one. She's the third protagonist of my documentary. And her house is towards the end of the village. So if you see the straight road where the three women walk, right? And foraging is such a women activity in that village where I was documenting it. The two married women and Yanchano are friends because they roll as a team. They're a foraging team. But in a sense, the third protagonist, she had to endure being ostracized, right? Being treated as an outcast, because, you know, you have this horrible word, spinster in English. Okay. you have this horrible word spinster in English, and in a sense that in Lotha it's called loran. Loran is something that's overripe and like unfit, perhaps even to be eaten or consumed anymore, right? So in a sense, this is really the tag that she has, but I was really amazingly drawn to her spirit, right? That the fact that she carries her dao, she sharpens it. So I made sure that knowing her story, I wanted to put that snippet, if you'll notice, where she's sharpening the dao. In a sense, and I think her story is so important that in the chapter that I'm writing on their lives, I really wanted to focus on the third protagonist and also the first and the second, because who are women and what are their relations? And in a sense, the two married women, their narratives and the account of the third woman is very different, right? They're sisters, and in a sense, I think there's a very amazing kind of a solidarity, a women's solidarity that's going on there. And I got to speak briefly to the third protagonist's family, and of course she's there, but according to customary law, she won't get anything. So the house that you see, the third protagonist house that you see, she's gonna grow old there, right? And she's in a sense providing. So I feel that she overdoes things, whether it's about foraging, whether it's about providing, whether it's about constantly working to show that she's someone who's productive. So in a sense, there's quite a tension there, and perhaps I couldn't bring it that in the documentary. When it comes to foraging and fermenting, it's primarily, I think, a very gendered world, and women and girls, I think, tend to get into that much more. When I was in the village and talking to boys and all, they were like, nah, there's no way we're going to go to the forest. Like, forget it. That's not going to happen. So that was happening. So yeah, I'll perhaps I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Dolly. I think you responded to a lot of questions in your remarks, because a lot of questions are asking about the relationship between the women and how gender and ethnicity play a role in this bamboo shoot business. There's one more question I think attached to it, is how so many migrants to mainland India also carry this business, and how it's also gender way the women carrying on this business even in mainland India. And how do we secure that livelihood, or and also protect that economy for them? I think that was one of out of the many questions that also asked about that. And how does it affect the economy in both the care economy as well as the economy of transportation, and making sure that the women are adequately reimbursed, or so would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I think that's a very relevant question, because the question of labor and economy keeps coming up, and also the question about gender, right? So what caught my attention, because I live in Melbourne, where I think along with Stockholm, Melbourne, these are quite hipster cities. So if there's something that you have noticed in the documentary, is the labor, right? And you don't have machines. These are like manual. Had it been, in a place in Melbourne, it would be artisanal, right? It would be it's known as handcrafted. That means that there's an additional value to that, right? Something that, is not done by machine, something that's done by hand. So if you look at cities like Melbourne or even New York, London and all, that when it says it is handcrafted, you're always paying an extra to that, right? You turn that around. What happens in a state like Bambooshoot? These are actually items that even, for instance, state initiatives have had challenges to kind of, how can I say, to package it and then to sell it, right? So perhaps the issue about economy is very big, but I would say the issue about value. How do we value our labor, and how do we value the food items that we're eating? And I think this is a really broad debate, and a very important part of policy that we want to bring in. And I can see that my brother Amba Jamir is here. And this is a conversation that even the Himalayan Consortium of Indian states have been thinking about it. I was very fortunate to be invited to the Shillong conversations in 2019, November, and I had a great time listening and learning to how is it that the Himalayan states, which includes the entire Northeast India, including the central Himalayas of India, are thinking about value. So we can't just limit the bamboo that's in the documentary perhaps to Nagaland, but in a sense to think about the region and what's happening to our food. The second thing that we need to think about is that in terms of, why is it, have you wondered, that we get bamboo shoot in brine in can from Bhutan, right? But we can't get it from India. We can't get the jams that we make across Northeast India anywhere in the stores. So perhaps when it comes to economy, political economy, we need to, I think, seriously think. And for me as an anthropologist, the more I'm looking at fermented food that we eat across the region, the more it's getting connected to debates and to movements on the ground around food sovereignty, around policies, and how is it that we can actually come together? Because these conversations can't be made in silos. How does, for instance, the bamboo shoot from, let's say, Nagaland or, Manipur that's being made, or Assam that's being made, rich places like Delhi, rich places like Bombay, I'm sure people who are zooming in and listening to that conversations, they'll have a much better sense. I'm sure we have entrepreneurs listening, people who have run restaurants in those cities, and they'll know how it's done. It's done either by cousins, relatives back home, families who are running to the train station, who are going to the airports and sending it. Right? So even now, it's really done in a very, in a very private, intimate, domestic places. We have some businesses that are coming up who can I think, mail it, but yet these are like in very, very small quantities. So I think when it comes to quantity and when it comes to perhaps the market, that's a conversation that I think we should all be thinking about. So thank you for the questions.
So we'll be taking one last question. I just wanted to let everyone know that Dolly has agreed to take on the overflow questions that could not be answered during this webinar. So we will be putting up the responses on our YouTube channel once this video goes up. So you don't have to worry about your questions not being answered. The second question I think I'd like to ask is that you touched on it briefly about how fermented bamboo shoot has been popularized post the Accord, and how this cessation of conflict has affected the lives of women producers. Would you like to elaborate on that a bit?
Tell me that again, Vidisha.
The popularization of bamboo shoot, fermented bamboo shoot post the Accord, and how this cessation of conflict has affected the lives of women producers.
This is a really interesting question, because I think the post-ceasefire time has seen a couple of things. The first thing for me as an anthropologist, since my last, the book that came out last year on migration had dealt with that, was really the out-migration of people, right, from across the Naga holdings. And the ceasefire also coincided with perhaps a very booming post-liberalization of India to do with shop, to do with opportunities. But this was a very particular kind of migration that was happening. And I write that, I think, very clearly in my book, connecting it to the post-ceasefire. And it was, I would say, if you look at the cuisine, the Northeast cuisine, just going and sprouting all over, I think there's something about Naga food, right, that takes the lead. And I say that because perhaps it's because of the fermented items that creates a lot of conflict, or that creates different kinds of conversations about taste and other stuff. I would clarify this by saying that many communities across the Northeast eat fermented items, including ngari and all others. But there's something about, I think, the Naga fermented food that has caused the post-ceasefire, I think, Naga community entrepreneurship in the hospitality sector, especially restaurants and cafes, to really stand out. So having said that, the post-ceasefire time to be looking at migration and, in a sense, the hospitality industry, the second part that comes into this conversation also has to do then with the gender relations and the livelihood issue. The livelihood issue that is connected to food is very much, I think, driven by a state that is perhaps well-intentioned to see economy growing. So one of the first essays that I wrote about fermented food was called Making Pickles During Ceasefire. And that's a 2015 essay that I wrote for the Economic and Political Weekly. And it was the first time, as an anthropologist, I was invited to talk about food and conflict at the Center for Poverty Analysis in Colombo in Sri Lanka. And it was thanks to my friend who is passed on, Vijay Nagraj. He's the one who, in a way, pushed me to think about that. And ever since I wrote that essay, Making Pickles During Ceasefire, the layered experiences of women who are now both, I think, having to carry a lot of caregiving work during the ceasefire. Remember, it's a ceasefire, it might break, right? And that's what I would like to emphasize. The conflict is still on and it's a ceasefire, and what's happened to gender relations right there? And I've written a lot on that issue. So I think for those of you who are interested, you can also look at that. But particularly in terms of relating to food and community and ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, I feel as an anthropologist, there's been an additional burden of women to be both caregivers, at the same time be entrepreneurs, make an extra livelihood. And I'm not saying that women are refusing to do that. Of course, they are doing that. It's good. They're making extra bucks on it. But in a sense, I think feminist economists like Naila Kabir, taking the case of Bangladesh and the position of women workers in the garment industry, in the garment factories, that debate, right? What do you do? I think should really make us look at the larger frame that the state and perhaps the livelihood entrepreneurships are offering us, right? What is it that in the basis of looking at monetized economies are we erasing? And one thing we are erasing is that perhaps what happens to basic needs, right? Whether it's health, whether it's reproductive needs, whether it's in the time of ceasefire, looking at education, right? Because one of the peg is that you make an extra buck by making a bottle of pickle. You can buy a fridge, or you can send your kid to school. And I think that's where we are letting off the state, I would say, during the ceasefire, right? That's where we are letting off the state. Our ability then to engage with the state during ceasefire cannot only be one of blame, right? The state is failing in this, but in a sense, I think to be able to say, hang on, if you're having this, right, during post-ceasefire after 1997, if entrepreneurship, livelihood, and everything has become such a buzzword, right? It's become such a sexy word. Where is it leading us? And I think because we're having this conversation during the pandemic, I would say that the rage of migration was so big in Nagaland, right? Soft skills was such a buzzword. The government was like, give everyone soft skills and send them out as migrants. They'll bring in money. And it collapsed, right? You see the pandemic, hotels are shut, hospitality industries are shut, cruise is shut, salons are shut, the kids are coming back. So in a sense, even as we're talking about migration and the ceasefire right now with economy, what kind of skills do we have? I think it's clearly related in a sense. If you're wondering where is Dolly going with it, it's clearly related then to what Yirmiyan and Uma was saying about our connection with the land, right? The further we have gone away from the land and we've become migrants and become so cool, selling a pair of Levi's or, like washing someone's hair in a saloon and earning money and all of a sudden the detachment and the militarization, the history of our militarization with that land, the alienation that we have had is actually come bite us, right, during the pandemic. And I think this is a time when both Uma and Yirmiyan are pushing us in a sense to think about the land. And I would think that that's where perhaps my work on food and fermentation is sitting.
Thank you so much, Dolly, for your comments and your responses. I think it brings us again to the question back of like the pandemic and how the migration shaping it is also showing all of this in sharp focus for all of us, especially those connections with land and labor. We'd like to wrap up now, but before we do, we have one final surprise, which I think will go online in like a second. But before that, I would just like to mention that Zuban also has a couple of online calls going on for researchers and grants. And one of them is for journalists, and one is specifically looking at women, work and labor and focusing on the structural violence that accompanies these work conditions for women and other categories and other marginalized identities. So please check that out and forward it to anyone you think is relevant. And as a closing, I think, Dolly, would you have any final comments before we have Akhu for our last song?
I'm so grateful that you all have logged in. I can see 172 people still around, and we have gone on an hour. And thank you so much. I mean, this means a lot to me. I have students, well-wishers, amazing, I think my mentors, my brothers, my teacher Uma Chakravarti is here. She taught me since 1994, and she always told me that I don't care what you do, if you don't engage, then forget it. Every time I come back to India, she's always asked me, Bacho, so she never asked me about which journals I publish in. She's like, have you written that commentary? Have you been part of any movements? Like, what about the indigenous issue in India? So she keeps me straight and narrow, and I'm very, very grateful that I still have my teachers, in a sense, they're keeping me straight and narrow. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone. And I think the time is for Akhu once again to give us a surprise and the solidarity for all of us. And I think perhaps I'll be quiet now.
Hello. I'll play a song called I Want to Go to Moscow. Before I start the song, I want to thank Dolly for having me in this online thing, and then thanks for the movie. And of course, we all we grew up amidst Bambooshoot, Akhuni, and everything. And thank you, Yirmiyan, Yirmiyan. I haven't talked to you like this, and it's great to listen to your opinion about the movie, about the land, culture, tradition, and thanks Uma for your feedback. And thanks to Juba. So I'll play a song called "I Want to Go to Moscow." It's a song about, again, my songs mostly are about militarization. If Manipur was not that militarized, I may not have been singing. I may not have been a musician. So the song talks about how one can be tired of its own hometown. The song talks about Manipur University. It's the only central government we have, but still you'll find an army camp inside a campus in the Assam Rifles. It's been happening, when something happens in other universities, people make noise, protest, this and that, but this has been happening for a long, long time. What kind of hometown is it? I need permission to go around. What kind of university is this? They got an army camp inside the campus, and no one says anything about it. And the people, they are busy making friends with the army for free alcohol. They all gonna die alcoholic, just like me, but I buy my own drinks every night. I'm bored of my hometown, and I go somewhere else. I'm tired of my country, and I change my citizenship. I wanna go to Moscow, standing next to Mayakovsky statue. I wanna read his quote, drinking lots of vodka. Sorry, I'm getting a call in between. Even if I don't like Fidel Castro, before Ginsburg in 1965. I wanna go to China with my love. We gonna make so much of love and sell across the world, saying they are made in China. I'm bored of my hometown, and I go somewhere else. I'm tired of this country, and I can't smile intensely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Akhu. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for participating, and we'll forward your questions and have a good weekend. Thank you, Dolly.